What happens when the infinite meets the finite? When God chose to reveal himself to Moses through a burning bush that consumed nothing, he established a divine paradox that challenges our understanding of the sacred. This miraculous encounter reveals profound truths about God's nature and his desire to communicate with humanity. In the wilderness of Horeb, an ordinary shepherd's day became extraordinary when Moses witnessed something impossible: a bush ablaze with fire, yet never consumed by the flames. This wasn't mere natural phenomenon, but a theophany, God manifesting himself in physical reality while maintaining his transcendent nature. The burning bush represents the perfect intersection of the divine and earthly realms, where God's infinite power touches our finite world without destroying it. The location itself holds significance. Horeb, later called the Mountain of God, became sacred not because of its physical properties, but because God chose to manifest his presence there. This teaches us that the sacred is unconfined to grand cathedrals or elaborate temples. God can transform any ordinary place into holy ground through his presence. Moses was tending sheep, performing mundane tasks, when the extraordinary invaded his routine. This reminds us that God often reveals himself in the midst of our daily responsibilities, not just in moments of religious ritual. The burning bush also establishes a pattern for divine revelation throughout Scripture. God consistently chooses to reveal himself in ways that capture attention while preserving his mystery. The fire draws Moses closer, creating curiosity and wonder. Yet the unconsumed nature of the bush maintains an element of the inexplicable. This balance between revelation and mystery characterizes all genuine encounters with the divine. God reveals enough of himself to invite relationship while preserving enough mystery to inspire awe and reverence. Fire throughout biblical literature symbolizes God's holiness, judgment, and purifying power. When God appears as fire in the burning bush, he's communicating essential aspects of his character to Moses and, by extension, to all humanity. Fire consumes impurities while preserving what is valuable, exactly what God's presence does in human lives. The burning bush demonstrates that God's holiness doesn't destroy what he loves, but rather purifies and preserves it. Consider how fire operates in the natural world. It transforms everything it touches, breaking down complex structures into simpler elements, releasing energy and light in the process. When Moses encountered the burning bush, he was witnessing a visual representation of transformation without destruction, a preview of how God works in human hearts. The bush remained intact while being completely enveloped by divine fire, suggesting that God's presence, rather than annihilating our humanity, actually fulfills and perfects it. This symbolism extends beyond the initial encounter. Throughout Israel's journey, God would manifest as a pillar of fire by night, providing both light and warmth while maintaining his protective distance. The fire represents God's passionate love, intense, powerful, and transformative, yet controlled and purposeful. It's not the wild, destructive fire of chaos, but the intentional, life-giving fire of divine love that seeks to illuminate and warm without overwhelming or destroying its object. The unconsumed nature of the burning bush also prefigures the incarnation, where divine fire would dwell within human flesh without consuming it. Jesus Christ represents the ultimate burning bush, fully divine fire dwelling within full humanity, transforming without destroying, revealing God's nature while remaining mysteriously transcendent. When God commanded Moses to remove his sandals because the ground had become holy, he was teaching a fundamental principle about the nature of sacred space and divine presence. Holiness isn't inherent in physical locations, but is conferred by God's presence. The ordinary patch of desert sand became sacred because the holy God chose to manifest himself there, transforming the mundane into the magnificent through his very presence. The act of removing sandals carries deep cultural and spiritual significance. In ancient Near Eastern culture, removing footwear was a sign of respect, humility, and recognition of one's inferior status. By asking Moses to remove his sandals, God was establishing the proper posture for encountering the divine humility, reverence, and acknowledgement of God's supreme holiness. The bare feet touching holy ground created an intimate connection between the human and the sacred, symbolizing vulnerability and openness to divine transformation. This concept of sacred ground challenges our modern understanding of the holy. We often think of holiness as something confined to religious buildings or special occasions, but the burning bush reveals that any place can become sacred when God chooses to manifest His presence there. This democratizes the sacred, making every location a potential site of divine encounter. Yet it also elevates our responsibility. If any ground can become holy, we must approach all of life with the reverence appropriate for potential sacred encounters. The temporary nature of this sacred ground also teaches us about the flexibility of divine presence. God wasn't confined to this bush or this location. He could withdraw His manifest presence and make other places sacred. This freedom of divine presence reminds us that while God chooses to inhabit certain spaces and moments in special ways, He cannot be contained or controlled by human expectations or religious structures. The most remarkable aspect of the burning bush encounter wasn't the miraculous fire itself, but the fact that God spoke from within it. This divine speech represents God's desire to communicate with humanity, bridging the infinite gap between Creator and creation through the medium of language. When God called Moses by name, "Moses, Moses," He demonstrated intimate knowledge and personal concern for this individual shepherd. The repetition of Moses' name suggests urgency and affection, similar to how we might call someone we love when we're excited to see them. This wasn't the distant voice of an impersonal deity, but the warm call of a personal God who knows Moses intimately and has specific plans for his life. The divine voice speaking from fire combines God as transcendent holiness with His immanent personal care. He is both the consuming fire of perfect holiness and the loving voice that calls each of us by name. God's self-revelation as "I am who I am" from the burning bush establishes His eternal, unchanging nature. Unlike the burning bush, which appears to change, being on fire, while remaining unchanged, not being consumed, God's nature is consistently eternal and self-existent. This name reveals God as the source of all existence, the one who simply is without need of external support or validation. When Moses would later tell the Israelites that "I am" sent him, he was carrying the authority of the self-existent God. The communication from the burning bush also establishes the pattern of prophetic calling. God reveals Himself, calls the person by name, gives them a mission, provides the necessary authority and power, and promises His presence throughout the journey. This pattern repeats throughout Scripture, reminding us that God's communications aren't merely informational but transformational. They don't just give us knowledge about God, but invite us into partnership with His purposes. The burning bush encounter wasn't merely a mystical experience for Moses' personal edification. It was the launching pad for God's great rescue mission of the Israelites from Egyptian bondage. God revealed that He had heard the cries of His people and was prepared to act decisively for their liberation. The burning bush becomes the commissioning ceremony for one of history's greatest rescue operations, demonstrating that divine encounters always carry missional implications. God's declaration that He had come down to deliver His people reveals the divine willingness to intervene directly in human history. The God who manifests in the burning bush is not a distant deity uninterested in human affairs, but an actively involved God who sees suffering, hears cries for help, and responds with decisive action. The burning bush represents God's commitment to justice and His refusal to remain passive in the face of oppression and suffering. The mission given to Moses, leading the Israelites out of Egypt, seemed impossible from human perspective. Moses was a fugitive shepherd with a speech impediment, and the Israelites were enslaved to the most powerful empire of their time. Yet God's presence in the burning bush provided the authority and power necessary for this impossible task. The same fire that burned without consuming would later become the pillar of fire leading Israel through the wilderness, demonstrating continuity between the call and the journey. This missional aspect of the burning bush reminds us that genuine encounters with God as presence invariably lead to involvement in His redemptive work in the world. The fire that draws us to God also sends us out to participate in His purposes. We cannot remain unchanged spectators after witnessing God's presence. We become participants in His ongoing work of liberation and transformation. Despite the detailed account of the burning bush, profound mysteries remain that stretch beyond human comprehension. How can finite minds fully grasp the mechanics of divine fire that burns without consuming? How can material creation contain the infinite Creator without being destroyed? These questions point us toward the ultimate mystery of God's nature. He is simultaneously transcendent and immanent, wholly other yet intimately near. The burning bush serves as a perpetual reminder of the limitations of human understanding when confronting the divine. We can observe, describe, and draw meaning from God's self-revelation, but we cannot fully contain or explain it. This is not a failure of human intellect, but a recognition of the appropriate boundaries between Creator and creation. The mystery preserves both God's majesty and our humility, preventing us from reducing the infinite to the comprehensible. Yet this mystery doesn't lead to agnosticism, but to worship. The burning bush teaches us that encountering God's presence generates awe, reverence, and transformative obedience rather than complete understanding. Moses didn't need to understand the physics of the unconsuming fire. He needed to respond appropriately to the God who revealed Himself through it. The mystery invites faith, trust, and worship rather than demanding explanation. The burning bush ultimately points beyond itself to the greater mystery of God's love for humanity. Why would the infinite God care about finite creatures? Why would the self-sufficient Creator involve Himself in the messy complications of human history? These questions, like the unconsuming fire, burn at the heart of faith, providing enough light to guide our steps while preserving enough mystery to inspire lifelong wonder and devotion. The burning bush remains one of history's most profound symbols, a reminder that the God who created the universe desires intimate relationship with humanity. In fire that burns without consuming, we glimpse the divine love that transforms without destroying, revealing that our encounter with the Holy doesn't diminish our humanity, but fulfills it in ways beyond our comprehension.